A brief history of the Mongol Empire. The Muslims knew the Mongols as the accursed of God, and, well, they should have. The old Islamic civilizations of Persia and Turkey were all but extinguished by their ferocity. Only in Palestine were they successfully thwarted by the Mamluks, a dynasty of Turkish warrior slaves who would make Palestine the center of Islamic culture, and their empire the most powerful in the Middle East. And in Japan, another emergent warrior class, the samurai, also successfully defeated Mongol expansion, having earlier pushed imperial rule to one side and instituted military feudalism. Nevertheless, the Mongols carved out in under 50 years the largest empire the world had ever seen. The military genius and inspiration behind it all was Temujin, a chieftain who would be proclaimed Genghis Khan, Lord of the Earth. Driven by a sense of divine passion, he forged the Mongol nation out of disparate nomadic peoples, creating an army with the potential to conquer the world. Numbering around 2 million people, the Mongols were not so much a race as a confusion of tribes, each with a ruler known as Khan, and each comprising numerous clans whose members honored a common ancestor. They had once been united. At the dawn of the 12th century, a great Mongol state had been formed by Kublai Khan of the Borjigin clan, but their unity had evaporated following wars against the Chinese Jin dynasty. By the 1160s, hopelessly divided tribes and clans pursued petty feuds passed down from generation to generation. The rise of Temujin. At the time of Temujin's birth in 1162, the Mongol World-Asian Plateau, varying from 900 to 1,500 meters above sea level, was bounded by the Altai and Tian Shan mountain ranges in the west, and by the great Kinhan Peaks to the east. The land was divided by nature into 3 terraces. The vast northern of Outer Mongolia merging into the great forests at the fringe of the Siberian tundra, the central region, dominated by the Gobi Desert, some 1,900 kilometers wide, and the southern grasslands of Inner Mongolia. East of the grasslands was the Buddhist kingdom of Xixia, founded in about 990 by Tangut nomads from Tibet. Yet farther east lay China, which was divided into 2 realms. To the north lay the empire of the Jin dynasty, created in 1115 by the conquering Jurchen, a semi-nomadic forest people from Manchuria. And to the south, the 200-year-old Chinese Song Empire, perhaps the world's most advanced civilization. The 13th century's Secret History of the Mongols is the only native source of information about Temujin. Compiled in 1240, possibly by a Mongol chief justice, it tells of Temujin's ancestry and early life, emphasizing his courage by recounting various boyhood adventures. In 1162, a son was born to the Khan or chief of one of the Mongol clans, the Borjigins, in the north. His father, Yasugai, named him Temujin. The Borjigins were one of the most powerful clans and part of the confederation of several tribes, of which Yasugai was acknowledged as the leader. Temujin was a descendant, possibly a great-grandson of Kublai Khan. According to legend, his birth was auspicious because he entered the world gripping a clot of coagulated blood in his fist. As was the custom, Temujin's marriage was arranged when he was 9 years of age. His father chose Bort, the daughter of an allied chief, to be his son's bride. Temujin then went to live among his wife's people, the Kongarads. On the way home, after delivering his son to the Kongarads' camp, Yasugai happened upon a chief of the Tatar tribe. Accepting hospitality, he partook in food that was laced with poison, dying the next day. In the wake of this tragedy, Yasugai's family was banished from their tribe. Temujin joined his mother and younger siblings as they struggled to eke out a living in the wilderness. For a period of time, they endured abject poverty in the harsh region of the upper Onan River, where they subsisted only on berries and such small creatures as marmots and dormice. The writer of Secret History does not tell us precisely how the family's fortunes were revived, but the first step must have been the acquisition of horses and livestock from sympathetic clansmen. At the age of 15, Temujin was taken by Tayukud raiders and forced into slavery. He managed to develop a friendship with one of his captors, who helped him escape. When he returned to Kongarad village and married Bort, the girl his father had selected for him, he took his bride to live with his mother and brothers. 3 years later, in 1181, Bort was kidnapped during a raid by the Merkit tribe. Temujin, now a powerful 19-year-old, plotted her rescue. Temujin managed to secure alliances with several local tribes in order to attack the Merkit. The raid that followed was a bloodbath, with more than 300 Merkit men, women, and children killed. But there was no sign of Bort. Discerning that she had been carried off by fleeing Merkit warriors, Temujin left his men to plunder the enemy camp and set off in pursuit. The next day, he returned with his wife on the horse behind him. 9 months later, Bort gave birth to a boy. His paternity was uncertain, but Temujin named him Joshi and accepted him as his son. Temujin's boldness and bravery won him widespread support among the allied tribes. He capitalized on this popularity to forge alliances and start putting together the greatest confederation of tribes the Mongols had ever seen. Those tribes who refused to ally with him were destroyed. After crushing the Merkits, Temujin shored up his alliance with the Khanates, at the time the most powerful of the Mongol tribes. He then turned his attention to the Tatars, a chief of whom had poisoned his father. Temujin marched his army against the Tatars in 1202. It was another slaughter, with most of the males being hacked to death. The women were taken captive and claimed by Temujin's troops. He took 2 of them as wives for himself. At the dawn of the 13th century, Temujin, now a renowned warrior, had built up a large following. As the head of an army of more than 20,000 strong, he set about destroying his enemies with a combination of outstanding generalship and utter ruthlessness. He aimed to destroy traditional divisions and unite the Mongol world under his control, and he sought to achieve it by eliminating rivals capable of challenging his authority. By 1203, Temujin had achieved complete mastery of central and eastern Mongolia. Over the next 3 years, he completed his conquest of the steppe lands by marching west to defeat the great Naiman tribe. In addition, he consolidated his position by capturing a warrior chief named Jamuka, who had formal tribal coalitions to challenge Temujin's leadership. From childhood, Temujin had been driven by a sense of divine mission and an unshakable belief that it was his destiny to follow in the footsteps of Kublai Khan by uniting the Mongol tribes. In 1206, he fulfilled that mission. On the banks of the Onon River, at a Kurultai, or General Assembly of all the chieftains of the steppe lands, he was proclaimed Genghis Khan, Khan of Khans, or universal ruler of all the Mongol peoples. At the age of 45, Genghis Khan had become more than the supreme ruler of the Mongol nation. It was popularly accepted that his destiny was to conquer and rule the world. Enemies of the Mongols. The Mongols faced many opponents. While some of them used strategies and tactics that were similar, they also came against enemies who had a completely different approach to warfare than their own. Yet they managed to adjust to these differing styles of warfare and eventually defeat them all, except for the Mamluks and the Japanese, although the weather played a large role in deciding the outcome of the latter invasion. Among the most challenging opponents of the Mongols were the other steppe nomads, whether they were from the Mongolian plateau or made up of the numerous Kipchak and Kangli Turks of Eurasian steppe. These tribes fiercely resisted the Mongols until they had no choice but to join them. The nomads were organized along tribal lines in a confederation. Chieftains within the confederation led their own clans and tribes as individual units, but some of them became more organized. Several million nomads lived across the steppes of Eurasia, from the mountains of Manchuria to the Carpathian Mountains. If they had been united into a single state, they would have proved a serious challenge to the Mongols. However, large distances and tribal rivalries prevented any formal union among them. Despite this, some areas, such as the Vogel River region, put up a stubborn resistance throughout the 1220s and into the next decade. The nomads fought in a style similar to the Mongols, mainly as horse archers. Their 2 key offensive skills were mobility and encirclement. As with young Mongol men, steppe nomads mastered riding and archery at an early age. In addition to composite bows, they used a variety of weapons including spears, javelins, and sabers. The fact that they were so similar in their style of warfare to the Mongols was what made them so dangerous. The one advantage that the Mongols held was the discipline that Genghis Khan and his commanders had instilled into the army. Whereas the nomads would stop to plunder, the Mongols were exclusively focused on destroying their enemy. It took just 2 years for the Mongols to conquer the Rus principalities. Over that period of time, however, the Rus put up a strong defense. As with the Khwarezmian army, it was their lack of unity that contributed to their downfall. The Mamluk Sultanate was a medieval caliphate that ruled over Egypt, the Levant, and the Hejaz. It persisted from the Ayyubid dynasty's collapse until the Ottoman invasion of Egypt in 1517. The Mamluk were among very few armies to actually defeat the Mongols on the field of battle. They were an army of slaves, with the very name Mamluk being Arabic for slave. The Mongols never managed to conquer them. Conquering China. In northern China, the northern Jin Empire managed to stave off complete Mongol domination for almost a quarter of a century. While the Mongols routinely defeated their armies, the Jin Empire, with a population of around 50 million people, possessed the resources and manpower to create new forces and slow Mongol progress by utilizing its heavily fortified cities. Yet by 1231, the Mongols had conquered the important Jin cities of Shandong, Hebei, and Shaanxi and wiped out any remnants of resistance. They then set their sights on conquering the Song dynasty of southern China. At the beginning of 1234, the highest decision-makers of the Song court were busy deliberating on how to respond to the collapse of the Jin Empire and the impending invasion of the Mongols, who now sat at their doorstep. They never came up with a clear plan of how they could defeat the Mongols in either the short or the medium term. As a result, the Song court stumbled into war with the Mongols with no clear plan of action. The two key advantages they had over the Mongols were political stability and the ability to mobilize vast economic resources. These factors were to come into play and would largely be responsible for the 40-year duration of the war. Initially, however, the Song court was focused on the opportunities offered by the collapse of the Jin. Within a short time of the subjugation of their northern neighbors by the Mongols, they embarked on a campaign to recapture the former Song lands and three of the old Song capitals, Kaifeng, Yingtian, and Liaoyang. The generals responsible for these victories then put forward a case for the re-liberation of the old capital of Song and an immediate invasion of Henan. However, the campaign was so badly organized that it never made it to its destination of Liaoyang. 10,000 men reached Kaifeng in July 1234. 50,000 more soon followed, but these were ambushed en route to Liaoyang and annihilated. This was the first Song defeat of the Mongol War. There would be many more to come. The end of the Song Empire came in 1279 with a naval battle in Yemen. When they learned of the defeat, tens of thousands of Song elites chose suicide rather than subjecting themselves to Mongol rule. The Mongol Empire now had the largest army in Asia. It also had the largest fleet, the most prosperous people, and the largest city on earth, Hangzhou. It was a spectacular achievement for Kublai Khan, the grandson of Genghis, who would become the ruler in 1271, and it cemented his position as the Great Khan. The disintegration of the empire. Kublai Khan's hold over the empire was very different from that of his grandfather half a century earlier. The Mongol domain had been split into 4 sectors. Kublai held power over just one of them, the Yan dynasty covering modern-day China, Korea, Tibet, and Mongolia. The other 3 domains were Central Asia, the Khanates and West Asia, and the Golden Horde in Russia. Tensions between the 4 domains weakened the empire, leading to fragmentation. There were also major differences between Mongol traditionalists who wanted no lessening of the old pastoral nomadic ways and modernists who wanted to integrate with conquered peoples. Following Kublai Khan's death in 1294, the Yuan dynasty became increasingly weaker. The Khans that followed allowed themselves to be assimilated into Chinese culture, and the power of the court declined rapidly. Rebellions began to break out all across China in the early 14th century. In the 1350s, a former monk named Zhu Chongba built a huge peasant following. In 1368, Zhu led his army against the Mongols, driving them out of Beijing. Zhu then established himself as the first emperor of the Ming dynasty, with the imperial name of Hongwu. The Mongol emperor, Togan Timur, managed to escape into the eastern steppes, where he died in 1370. The conquest of the Deep South proved even easier for the Ming army. The pirate admiral Feng Gaozheng had made offers of collaboration to the future Ming emperor as early as 1359. Now, submitting to Hongwu's imperial power, he offered ships to transport the Ming army along the coast. The Yuan warlords in the south mostly surrendered on good terms, with one prominent exception. Chen Yaoding was an illiterate peasant who had been a policeman before the Red Turban uprisings. In suppressing the rebels, he had shown great courage and martial skill, and as a provincial governor and commander of an army loyal to the Yuan in the southern province of Fujian, he held out until forced to surrender in February 1368. Captured and brought to Nanjing, he was offered an honorable pardon but replied, "The state is demolished, my family is gone, I shall die. What more is there to talk about?" He was put to death, but a shrine was built in his memory, for the emperor admired courage and loyalty even in his enemies. After 1368, the Ming armies fought only on the frontiers. Mongolia was invaded in 1370. Togan Timur, the last Yuan emperor, died, and Koko Timur fled into the Central Asian desert. The Red Turban state of Sichuan was suppressed in 1371. The defenders had slung chains across the Yangtze gorges, for which they hung platforms with stone-throwing catapults. But the advancing Ming fleet smashed these with cannon fire. In 1372, Zhu Da led an army across the Gobi Desert as far as Genghis Khan's old capital of Karakoram. However, he suffered heavy casualties at the hands of Koko Timur's surviving forces, and the Ming armies did not invade Mongolia again for 30 years. In 1382, they made one final conquest of the Mongol princedom of Yan'an in the far southwest. Rise and fall of the Golden Horde. On his deathbed in 1227, Genghis Khan divided his kingdom into Khanates among his 4 sons. The eldest son, Batu, inherited the westernmost part of the empire, covering Russia and Kazakhstan. The term Golden Horde refers to the Mongol rulers who dominated these lands for the 2.5 centuries following the death of Genghis Khan. The boundaries of the territory inherited by Batu included the Upper Volga, the territory of former Volga-Bulgar state, Siberia to the Urals, the northern Caucasus, Bulgaria, Crimea, and Khwarezm in Central Asia. Batu spent several years consolidating the massive territory that he now had possession over. Then in 1235, he set out to expand the empire. Over the next 3 years, Batu greatly increased his Khanate by conquering the principalities of Kievan Rus in modern-day northern Ukraine and western Russia. Batu next headed his feared Mongol army west to invade Poland and Hungary. 5 separate armies swept into Eastern Europe. 2 of them attacked through Poland, with the southern army moving through Transylvania. The main army was led by Batu himself, with his key general Subutai by his side. He attacked Hungary while a 5th army, led by Batu's brother Shaban, invaded the north of the main army in a wide sweeping arc. By early April 1941, Batu had conquered both Poland and Hungary. He then set his sights on Vienna. Before he set his army in motion, however, he received the news that his older brother, Ogadai, who had succeeded his father as the Khagan Emperor, died. Rather than returning to Mongolia, he remained in the vicinity of the Volga River. His brother, Guyuk, became the next emperor, and the change at the top brought an end to the Mongolian expansion to the west. Batu established his capital at Sarai, east of the Aktuba River, which was a tributary of the lower Volga River. Millions of Europeans in Eastern Europe now lived under Mongolian rule. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongolian peace, allowed them to live their lives without interruption, provided they paid their taxes to their Mongolian overlords. In fact, life was less violent than it had been under medieval European rule. A justice system was introduced, and trade routes were made more navigable and much safer. The Silk Road was reopened between China and Europe, massively increasing cross-cultural exchange between Asia and Europe. Such technologies as papermaking, printing, and the manufacture of gunpowder made their way to the West during this period. By the early 1300s, the Silk Road had also paved the way for the Italian silk industry. The peace of the Golden Horde continued until 1340, when the Black Plague swept in from the southeast. So many people were killed that basic food production and tax revenue was severely impacted. By 1359, the various Mongol rulers were fighting amongst themselves for supremacy. At the same time, several Slavic and Tatar city-states began to rise up in revolt. The Mongols managed to suppress these uprisings, but they could not hold back the power of Tamerlane, the supremely powerful ruler of the Chagatai Khanate. Tamerlane's army devastated the Golden Horde in 1395, looting its cities and killing many thousands of people. The Golden Horde survived for another 8 decades under a succession of Mongol rulers. Then in 1480, Ivan III Vasilievich, the Grand Prince of Moscow, expelled the Mongols from Moscow. Ivan then established the Russian Empire, becoming Ivan the Great. In 1487, a Mongolian attack on Lithuania was soundly defeated. The same thing happened 4 years later when the much-diminished Mongols attacked Poland. Finally, in 1502, the Golden Horde capital of Sarai was overrun by the Crimean Khanate. After 2.5 centuries, the Mongolian Golden Horde was no more.